Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Cristina Velez. I'm a senior instructional designer with Creighton University, which her main campus is located in Omaha, Nebraska, but I am lucky enough to work fully remote, so I am living in Florida. So I'm coming to you from Central Time Zone today. My session today is called AI's Responsible and Ethical Use Principles in Course Design. Okay, so the purpose of today's session. A lot has been said about AI use over the past, goodness, it feels like forever, right? Especially regarding ethical AI use in the classroom. While I will be talking about three different tenets of responsible and ethical AI use in course design, I really want to highlight and focus on a third tenet, which I like to emphasize as diversity. I will offer some examples of learning activities and course design kind of throughout. And then there will be hopefully enough time to have a poll, and maybe if folks want to get off mute or write in the chat their experiences and responses to a poll that I'm going to put up at the end. Okay, so the objectives for today, I will go over three core tenets of responsible and ethical AI use and analyze the one core tenet diversity because it is not often included when describing the ethical AI use in course design. Okay, so the three tenets of responsible and ethical AI use that I go by include responsibility. So you are the human component, and AI is just code with no sense of ethics or morality. Fairness, being creative and mine your own ideas. And finally, diversity. Use examples from different perspectives. Force AI to color outside of the lines. So by now, AI use in course design is prevalent. It's everywhere. It feels at least as though it's everywhere. And it's everywhere at different levels of fluency. So there's novice users of AI, there's middling users of AI, and then of course there's masters of AI bot communication. And I envy those folks because that takes a lot of skill to learn something brand new. So most of the time, whenever we talk about ethical AI use, responsibility and fairness, and usually equity or something similar to that is included in that definition or in those core concepts. Including the U.S. Department of Education has shared ethical standard recommendations that speak to the need for ensuring AI is used in fair and ethical ways. So one popular reason to incorporate AI in course design is for personalized learning. However, personalized learning is great, right? It helps students to kind of take ownership of their learning. It makes them feel empowered, which is wonderful. We want that from our students. But we also have to be very careful that any AI use, especially if it's used to create learning activities, are of benefit to the students. So what makes these three tenets a little different is that they focus on the human component of design and not having AI do all the heavy lifting, which leads me to the next slide. Don't outsource your creativity to AI. Start with your prompts, your words, your expertise first before asking AI to make edits or tweaks or fixes of any kind. You are the human in this relationship situation. Make use of your own creativity, your own experiences. While AI is ever evolving and making strides to be a little bit more human, it can only really mimic and expand on what it is told, not create without any sort of human input first. So always keep that in the back of your mind. An example that I'd like to share with this is a lot of producers of visual and auditory media have been accused of using AI-generated content as opposed to, normal human actors and singers and people with talent. In fact, I don't know if it's widespread, but late last year, a Dutch filmmaker created an AI actress called Tilly Norwood You can look her up. She has her own social media accounts. She made a music video. Apparently, it wasn't very good. A lot of critics did not approve of the quality. But it does sort of give me a little bit of pause, right? Because if we're outsourcing our creativity to code, to AI, how does that make us different from computers? And that kind of creation, it just sort of takes something away from being human, right? Because that creativity is what separates us as a species. Um, so I'm thinking, cave paintings back hundreds of thousands of years ago. However, she is a great example of mimicking what it means to be human. And so there may be positive consequences for creating AI artists. Um, I'm not really leaning into it. However, there could be. To me, it goes against the core tenets of responsible and fair AI use because the very human quality of being creative is being outsourced. And we want to be really careful about what we outsource to AI. So the first tenet that I want to go over is responsibility. You're gonna hear this a lot. You are the human component, and AI is just code. There's no sense of ethics, morality, nothing. Um, it's up to us to ensure that whatever we give to AI, however it takes those prompts, the output is responsible. So, because AI is just code, we need to make sure that the output avoids any sort of personal or protected information and that the output is accurate. Any use of AI should also be disclosed to students so that they can learn through modeling what it means to be responsible. How do you responsibly use AI? I'm a big proponent of modeling skills and tasks to students because, what better way to learn than to see an example of it? An example of ethical moral AI use would be, for example, when designing assessments, written versus a verbal spelling test here. Um, so a colleague of mine, she had one of her children had a spelling test and they had practiced using verbal practice. So just saying the words out loud, spelling the words out loud. But when it came to test day, the students were asked to write down their words and to spell the words written. Now, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but the it's not really responsible to ask students to practice a skill and then assess them in a different way. And that's how we have to think about AI is we need to be very careful about what kind of parameters we set when we are designing those prompts for assessments. Another example, if a student is asked to complete a writing assignment and a faculty member uses AI to generate a rubric for that assessment, um, hopefully, there's a lot of editing and arguing with the AI tool to ensure that the rubric accurately assesses the assignment. The parameters and criteria that you're asking the AI tool to use need to, be based on ethical and moral reasoning and to create something that matches and aligns with the objectives or goals of the learning activities. Again, you're going to hear this a lot, really specific and clear with what you input into AI. Yeah, I'm finding myself talking a little too fast, so apologize for that. I'll try to slow down. The next tenet is fairness. Um, so be creative and mind your own ideas. Be fair to yourself. This does not mean being fair to the tool or fair to others. It means being fair to yourself. So when I say be creative and mind your own ideas, an example is free writing as brainstorming. When I was in high school, one of my English teachers would have us free write for any time we had a writing assignment. And by that, I mean for about 5 minutes or so, or at least it felt that long, she would have us take out a piece of paper and a pen and just start writing anything that came to our minds, even if it was just the phrase, I don't know what to write. Eventually, some idea would pop into my head, and that would be the catalyst to start some kind of outline for the writing assignment. So this is what I mean. You want to make sure that you're not outsourcing your own ideas, your own experiences or perspectives to AI. So, using AI to create prompts and learning activities ignores that important first step of brainstorming. I have heard from lots of my colleagues that say they'll just input some kind of prompt into ChatGPT and just to see what it comes out with. And I definitely see the positive benefits that that can give to you, you know, if you have no idea where to start. I may be dating myself a little bit, but I remember in school, some teachers would say, don't use Wikipedia unless it's a way to help start your brain, kind of thing. Um, when using AI, if you're pressed for time, definitely understand that. I hear you on that one. And it can provide some interesting and useful first draft ideas, but always be fair to yourself and to think about what ideas you have to offer first. No matter what, however, make sure to maintain transparency by including some kind of AI use citation. You want to model fair use of AI for students by mentioning, hey, you know, I used AI to do XYZ. If any of you have been in the Discord channels as of today, I have seen some posts where at the very, very bottom it mentions that AI was used to help build that post. And I very much appreciate that because not that it takes away from the human that posted, I just appreciate that transparency. Um, if AI is used to brainstorm, um, just make sure that you you don't go down the rabbit hole. What I mean by that is a few weeks ago, I was trying to do some research on a project, and I asked Gemini to kind of collect some different articles, and it sort of took me in a topic that was not at all related. So, you know, keep that in mind. Create barriers for yourself as well when you're creating those prompts. Finally, diversity. It is my final core tenant. What I mean by diversity, I'm not talking about the controversial definitions or elements of diversity. I'm talking about having multiple and varied resources and perspectives, incorporating different learning activity modalities, modes, and just information transfer strategies. If you're going to use AI to incorporate diversity into learning materials, make sure to force AI to color outside the lines. Force it to grab resources from journals and articles and videos that maybe wouldn't have normally grabbed, but it could provide a really great new perspective for students. Um, So even when you're arguing with the AI tool to create that diversity, you're gonna need to be careful about acknowledging and minimizing bias. We have heard of the term hallucinations, and that just basically means AI has made something up. I was reading a news article earlier today about how lawyers, I don't remember in which country, but there's this uh, some lawyers are being found out as using resources or case citations that are completely made up. And that's what I mean about needing to acknowledge and minimize those biases because you want to make sure that anything you use and you cite uh, reflects the real world. And one way to do that is to argue with your AI tool. You want to just keep arguing with it until you are satisfied that the output reflects diverse real world situations, examples, and experiences, because it's those examples and experiences that help students to understand how your learning concepts apply to the real world. And really, that's what we want, right? We want our students to be able to take the information you're providing, critically think about it, analyze it, reflect on it, and then be able to use it or apply it into whatever real world situations that they're using their information in. So I have some learning activity examples here. Um, Obviously, they're not it. exhaustive list, but it's just a way to kind of start thinking about how to use AI when designing these different types of learning activities. So discussion board prompts. Prompts can be designed by inputting specific criteria into an AI tool. So for example, you could input the topic of the prompt, an open-ended or potentially controversial question into the prompt, and perhaps whatever resources students should be using to respond to that prompt. I always like including potentially controversial questions and prompts because it gets students to consider different perspectives. Another example would be an assignment that has students collect resources for a writing draft. So perhaps like my example earlier, perhaps you put into the AI tool, here's my topic that's being researched, and then here are the parameters. So date range of resources, the types of resources, and if there's a database research, like Google Scholar, for example, or perhaps mandating peer-reviewed articles only, and then see what the tool brings. It was very interesting, like I said, because some articles started veering off the topic. Another learning activity, which I'm seeing happen a little bit more, is analyzing AI for bias. Um, it's a really interesting type of activity because it it's where students input a prompt into the tool and then see what the tool writes about the topic. The student aspect of it, or the student part of it, is then they spend time analyzing whether there is bias in that output. So any kind of bias, if there's personal opinion without facts, or if the examples that are used are heavily skewed toward one perspective or another, if the citations are hallucinations, that kind of thing. Asking students to analyze output is a really great critical thinking type of activity, which leads also into grading AI output for accuracy. This works really well for any topic in any discipline because the objective is to ask AI to create something. So whether they're creating some kind of writing assignment, creating an image, calculations, flow chart, it doesn't much matter what is being created. The objective is that the student must analyze the output and then grade for accuracy. So they become the teacher. It's very similar to some more traditional learning activities where perhaps students were assigned a topic and they had to teach the class. It's very similar to that, but more of in an online environment. Of course, demonstrations, they can be activities where students deliver presentations, teach to the class, provide walkthroughs of new concepts, tools, and/or strategies. In this, AI tools can be very helpful to get students to kind of help with the brainstorming process, but not necessarily start it. The tools can also help organize their thoughts and create outlines and drafts. But what the difference between the AI doing workload and the student doing the workload is that once the drafts are made, once students have, created the completed demonstration, I should say, it's the students who are doing the presenting, the reflecting, observing, role playing, or oral communication. At the end of the day, they must know the information, the core concepts, and that's that could help minimize cheating if that is a concern. I know that's, not the greatest, but when you ask students to demonstrate that since they have to know the information, the likelihood of cheating goes down a little bit. Um, Finally, so in general, while AI tools can offer unlimited information, it takes the human brain to be able to critically analyze, reflect, and apply to the real world scenarios. And that's the most uh, important aspect of it is the application. Yes, computers and code are wonderful. The fact that I can look up anything on Google on my smartphone and just have any answer in the world is wonderful, is an amazing feat of human capability. But how do I use that information and apply it? That is what makes me human. That's how we want our students to consider using AI when they're completing their um, learning activities. Okay, so I know I kind of talked a little bit too quickly and went over a lot of things. So before I continue, does anyone have any questions?
No questions in the chat right now. If you do have a question, Christina encourages you to come off of mute and ask that question.
That's totally fine. We'll just keep right on going. Okay, so rubric design. I mentioned using AI to create rubrics at the beginning. Um, And it is a really great tool to kind of make those first few drafts of rubrics. They can be tricky to make because you have to consider lots of variables. You need to consider what the criteria that needs to be assessed, how many points you want to give to each criteria. How much do you want this assignment to be worth in the overall scheme of your course design? So I definitely understand wanting to, I don't want to say outsource, but get a helping hand when designing those rubrics. However, you still want to follow those three tenets. You want to make sure that the prompts you're giving use clear language to measure the learning. You also want to make sure that you're avoiding penalizing for things that don't actually further the learning of the student. What I mean by that is if the assignment is to create some kind of demonstration, it's not very helpful to penalize for spelling errors if the assignment isn't even looking at that. If there's no written product that goes along with that demonstration, I don't really see a fair use criteria in that rubric. But no matter, always argue with your AI tool to ensure that it fits and aligns with your course objectives. Be flexible to how you're assessing that final product. Um, so this would be if you are creating an assignment that students need to demonstrate that they've learned some kind of skill. Um, it's always helpful for students if they get the opportunity to be creative and produce something that isn't the traditional written paper. So perhaps your rubric has enough flexibility to allow students to create a video or interview someone and then create a blog about it, or I don't know, even create a comic strip about it, depending on your discipline and obviously the academic level of your students. I do have an example prompt here. It's very lengthy, but basically, the prompt needs to have specific parameters. So you want to include the grade level, the subject or discipline, point scale value, and assignment description. So, assignment description could be a writing assignment versus a discussion board post, or a group project. And that specific criteria that is being used to measure whether that student has learned. So while you still have to determine how many points, each criteria, using AI to create the rubrics can at least help make those drafts be a little bit clearer later. I'm going to go back to some learning strategies and activities here. I know I gave that giant list of example activities. So here I want to kind of separate them out a little bit into cognitive focused learning compared with immersive type learning. So there are different strategies and activities that need different parameters and criteria when you're developing those prompts for the AI tools. Um, Cognitive focused learning is usually activities that have students absorb, critically assess, reflect, and apply concepts mostly cognitively before they're asked to show their learning mastery. So case studies, peer reviews, discussions, reflections, journals, matching, that kind of stuff. Immersive type learning are activities that ask students to outwardly show their learning mastery. So for example, perhaps they need to develop some kind of scenario or maybe a team or a project problem that they need to solve, simulations, role playing, some kind of experiment in a lab. Those are all much more, the student is in the situation, in the learning environment, and they must show how their learning can be applied to real world situations. Usually the immersive type learning and cognitive focus learning are used in conjunction. So for example, asking students to review a case study and then create a final product, um, that that would then outwardly show learning by designing and demonstrating a role-playing activity, or perhaps having students include a self-reflection. Um, on their different, or I should say, individual responsibilities and work output during a group project. Responsible, fair, and diverse AI use when designing course materials works really well with scenario-based learning here. And that's because tools can create learning environments that help students to see, hear, and imagine themselves in different scenarios to apply those learning concepts. It's a really fascinating new aspect to using AI. I've seen it I've not in person, of course, but I've seen an example of this where a faculty member asked AI to create a scenario where student A had to interview expert A, and then it visually and auditorily put the student in a situation that felt like an office. It kind of just makes the learning experience more realistic. It helps them to better visualize what you're asking them to do. Um, However, I do express some caution using the tools in that manner because AI has already shown that it can clone voices and images. So you want to be careful, obviously, with personal information, but also any sort of copyrighted information, just to avoid any situations or learning environments that might not be fair and responsible. Okay, so I have a poll here. Um, Two questions. The poll itself just has one question. So you can feel free to scan the QR code, or the code will take you to vivox.com where you can enter the code there. That's listed on the bottom right. Or if you feel you don't want to do the code on Vivox, feel free to enter your response on the Zoom chat. The question is, how can responsible, ethical, and diverse AI use be implemented in your course design? So I'm just going to give a moment for that, and then I'm going to switch over to the poll so we can see what anonymous responses we might be getting. So take a few minutes to really consider how you might implement responsible, ethical, and diverse AI use.
When I scan the QR code, it says waiting for the host to start.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
I will
welcome.
stop this share really quick because I have to show the poll. Okay.
And it's live.
Yep. You should see the code, the address, and the QR code. And then if you want to answer both questions at once in here, that's fine. Or I like to be flexible. And you can answer the questions in the Zoom chat as well, or verbally. But just want to give everyone a few minutes to respond. That's a good point. Considering UDL concerns when designing, especially with the stricter federal guidelines that we are all expected to meet, AI has been shown to be very helpful, a very helpful tool, just because the guidelines are very specific. And there's a lot of them, and they can feel very overwhelming. So that is a great point, bringing up about the UDL concerns. Mm. I like that idea of not giving up the creativity, but refining it. I appreciate the wording of your statement there. It's a much better way of thinking about it. Ah, I'm not very familiar uh with OER. My Creighton has different rules for different faculty. So I'd be very curious how that experience went. Yep, the multiple pathways. Um, Yep, collaborative effort. Main hall rather than a main hall from AI. I know our school doesn't have a formal AI statement, so a lot of programs have come together amongst their own faculty and deans to develop what they think is acceptable use of AI. So it's always interesting to see what the different programs, how they view AI. Some of them choose to not allow any kind of AI, which, let's be honest, it's everywhere. And others are using tools in a more collaborative fashion. So, oh, interesting. So using some kind of coding format or coding matrix, I should say, to show the different levels of AI use. That's actually really great idea and perspective because I don't want to be, I don't want to come here and say, AI is bad or don't ever use it. It's just more a matter of keeping that human element to AI. Okay. So I see that there's 7 individuals in the poll, but that doesn't necessarily mean there will be 7 responses, and that's totally fine. But before I move on to the second question, is there anyone that wants to come off mute or just type it in the chat? Uh, any additional thoughts to question 1? Okay. So question 2, what challenges do you worry about when designing AI-based learning activities? I know some of these responses were alluding a little bit to it, um, but what barriers can you automatically think of that makes using AI-based learning activities a bit of a challenge?
So I don't know if anybody else is having this issue. It's not letting me respond again.
Oh, um, oh, that's probably the way. I apologize for the technical error here. Let's try it this way. Mm, I think I'm gonna have to close the poll. And then Oops. Okay. I tried reopening it.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So for anyone that just recently entered and that may have missed, I was just asking if anyone can think of any barriers right away that present challenges for utilizing AI-based learning activities. So feel free to respond to this poll or put it in chat or come off mute. Trusting the LLM dataset. Um, not, I don't want to make any assumptions on that response. So if you wouldn't mind, could you maybe explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, that was mine. I can just explain it verbally. Just knowing what data the large language model you're using was trained on, for me, that's like a big black box.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, I realize asking those critical questions is part of it, but just there's so many different models out there that you can be using or tools, and so sometimes it can feel overwhelming and challenging to kind of know whether like what the data is that it's actually trained on and how fair that is and unbiased.
Yes, you bring up an excellent point. Uh, my colleagues and I were having a meeting with our IT team this past week, actually, and that was a topic of very contentious conversation because we are a Microsoft school, so we use Copilot. And so we have to be a little bit careful what is input into the AI tool. But that is an excellent point. We don't want our students' information to just be out in the data world that we can't bring it back. So that is definitely a challenge. Okay. So I'm gonna get out of this poll then. Um, and go back to the original slide. So if you still would like to there we go, respond, please feel free to. Um, and if you have questions about the general presentation or anything that I talked about earlier, now's the time. Just because, if we can have this discussion, I think it would really be beneficial for everyone because I always like hearing different opinions.
Well, I have a question. I'm just curious. I know that some universities are developing policies and guidelines, others aren't. Is there like a recommended method for citing AI? Like I've seen stuff in APA and stuff like that, so I know some of that's happening. But like for
Mhm.
instance, if I'm putting together a slide deck, is there where can I get kind of like a standardized method for citing AI use? And also like at what level are people citing it? Like if you're just using it to brainstorm or ideate, are you citing it at that level or are you citing at the level where you're maybe using it to wordsmith or like that's still a little unclear to me.
That's an excellent point. Like I said, Creighton University does not have an official formal stance on any of this. However, best practices as a senior instructional designer, if if you can do a proper citation, I usually use like the Purdue OWL as my citation draft or example. I would, but even just a simple like acknowledgement statement, I think would be a good first step. Simply stating at the very, very bottom, this slide was drafted in conjunction with Gemini, or the articles listed on this resource page were collated by Copilot. Something like that, I think just as an acknowledgement helps anyone who's reading or listening or, just viewing your information can see that you got a little bit of help, which is totally great. Sorry about that. Come on, cat. Get the help. However, just being transparent with that also helps to show students like, yeah, you can definitely use these tools. They're great tools. You just have to be careful and then acknowledge it. So I'm sorry I can't give you a great answer. But hopefully somebody will come up with a bit more of a standardization uh, on how to acknowledge AI use.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
One of the participants did share an acknowledgement example in the chat if you wanted to check that out as well.
Yes, perfect. I think I can bring up the chat on my end. I can. Perfect. Okay. Um, so I'm gonna read the acknowledgement out loud just so that it's auditorily heard. Kind of best practices of UDL here. Um, so the acknowledgement example is this resource was developed with the assistance of Microsoft Copilot. This AI tool supported the author in organizing content, summarizing source material, and drafting initial text. All AI-generated contributions were reviewed, edited, and refined by the author to ensure accuracy, clarity, and alignment with instructional goals. That is a wonderful acknowledgement statement. I could not have written a better one myself. That is excellent. And I will definitely keep that in mind whenever the faculty I support ask me for any type of guidance. So thank you for sharing that. That is great. Okay, so it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. Um, let me just so this is my contact information. Uh, if you would like to talk more, have questions or anything, feel free to email me. That is my office direct line. Um, I'm much faster at responding to emails just because they're in my face. But obviously, I welcome any sort of communication. I like to keep this discussion open and ever evolving. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of this session. I know you had lots of them to choose from, so I appreciate that you came to mine. Um, are there any other questions or anything that anyone wants to pipe in with?
Well, thank you everybody so much for attending the session. I did put the session feedback link in there and we'd love to hear from you. So please don't forget to fill that out. Have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Christina.
Thank you.